So, continuing on my previous podcast, I want to talk a little bit about evolution. I talked about the daily routine of the cell and the electric law being seen as the primary explanation of all the events that are happening in the cell. So I'm going to say that there's what we call the electric law is really a default disposition. It's not really a law. The law is not really an explanation. And that there's an exception mode, and that allows for this disposition to functionality to operate. So like to transcribe a gene, you have like 40 protein molecules clamping down, and they have to take DNA and then take it over here, and the RNA is put on it, and it's transcribed, and then it's like this huge other 40 protein molecule that also has like a motor and a propeller, has to splice out in the right spots all the junk DNA, and then take it out, and then paste it back together, and then drag it over here, and then once you get a final copy and it's transcribed into an amino acid sequence, then it has to be all folded together, and it has little molecules that help it do that, and then just to get the 40 protein molecule that is used to like transcribe the thing, you have to put together these 40 proteins, for example. They all have to be configured in the right way. They all have to know where to go, and they have to work in conjunction with others, and then thousands of proteins are being made like every minute. So that anyone could think that that's happening just by virtue of a rigid law is pretty nuts. It's like, I can't even put a number on it. Like, there shouldn't even be one gene that's stable. People don't think in terms of compounded improbability. What's the chances of every single little like nuance attraction or repulsion of molecules that has to happen in one way rather than any other way? It's like almost zero from the start. Then you keep on multiplying it by zero, and then all the processes that have to happen simultaneously. I mean, I can't even. It's baffling. Billion to the billionth power from one cell. I don't even know. Like, let alone a trillion cells in your body cooperating. Like, and then every single living body that's ever existed. And to get evolution, it's pretty crazy. So I want to talk about the disposition to non-reductive, non-repetition, mutual novelty in evolution. Nietzsche pointed out in his book The Will to Power that life doesn't simply exist where it's favorable, it exists anywhere that it possibly can. Like, and as if it's like trying to fill out every single functional niche. And if you take Beetles, like say there's, I don't even know, it's 500,000 something Beetles or something. That means like it diverged from like one form or something, like spread out, and you have all these different functional forms. So I'm saying that all these forms diverge has to do with disposition and mutual novelty as non-reductive, non-repetition, but how it's doing has to do with disposition and functionality. So it's trying to remain functional, and disposition of functionality is part of a spectrum of dispositions. There's even a disposition to non-functionality that has to do with the food chain, and that's also, it's directed. That's the point I'm trying to make. So that everything can exist. Meaning the frog is not going to get too fast for the fly, and the fly is not going to get too fast for the frog. It's all regulated, and there's a feedback loop. It doesn't account for like environmental changes that happen abruptly, and that's why extinctions occur. Let's see. I think that's all I want to talk about that for now. Also, in the previous podcasts, I talked about how the bottom of existence is not anything at all. And one clue should be when physicists talk about superpositions of states, and it sounds all cool because you can't conceive it, but that should be a clue that it's not something, that there is no bottom, that there is no superposition, that the atom is just a pattern within a molecular, that's observed within a molecular array. That's my point. Another clue is that quarks and electrons are zero-dimensional empirically, and the fact that you can't conceive of anything that's not three-dimensional should also be a clue that they don't really exist, except as patterns that are measured. You're not gonna... There's no such thing as like a particle collision in a collider. You're not observing those. They're observing the molecular array being perturbed in the detector. What else do I want to say about that? So there's not really like scattering, like they talk about Rutherford scattering off like an electron. They can tell like the internal structure of an atom, but that's all symbolic also. It's not like they're directly observing that. You can't directly observe these things. And like I talked about last podcast, like there has to be a bottom that's hollow. And the changes have to happen discretely to avoid Zeno's paradox. Because if it's infinitely deferred, then you can... I talked about that last podcast. What else do I want to talk about? Niels deGrasse Tyson and a lot of these scientists try to say that they're explaining things like the tides, and they'll attack like religious people for saying that God did it, but when saying a hidden space-time medium is causing the tides is not any better than saying that God did it, because neither one is observable. And both of them fall prey to a Zeno-like paradox for interaction, because no one's really addressed the problem of discontinuous interaction in the first place. So, without discontinuity, you get like an infinite regress, like the Zeno-like paradox, pure continuity, which is not conceivable, or you have discrete changes. Like, all change is teleportation, essentially. So when people talk about teleportation, it's like, when I touch you, that's teleportation. So, deGrasse talks about the tides, and he also talks about, somebody asked him where the orbital motion of the planets come from, since you just have an accretion disk to start out with, and he's saying it's coming from the rotation of the accretion disk. That's also a problem, because you have like a homogeneous situation and is trying to make orderly asymmetries out of something that's homogeneous, trying to get something out of nothing. And I'm saying that there's no asymmetry for free. You can't get order out of disorder without a disposition for that. And even if you did say it's from the accretion disk rotation, you don't have an explanation for that. You see, there's just a pushing of the question back, and they're usually taking an analogy from another situation to justify their claim. One example of that is redshift. There's this assumption that because there's a redshift relationship with galaxies, that redshift has to do with motion as opposed to position, because that's how it works in like everyday life, like the sunrise and the sunset gets red shifted and blue shifted. But when they used to talk about the expansion of the universe, they didn't really know that there was like a supercluster void network that is all connected. So if something was uniformly expanding, you wouldn't expect it, the top of it, to be all together, like in a network. And then there's the problem, obviously, of what's it expanding into. They try to sidestep that by saying it's four-dimensional. But see, the problem is they're always trying to make you believe something that's not conceivable, because the math says it, even though the math's not saying something that's inconceivable. If you graph it on the screen, that's what it is. Like, mathematics is not actually doing anything. And if you accept things that are not conceivable, then it just opens the door for relativism. Because if you accept 11 dimensions, then why not any dimensions? If conceivability is not our limit, then you can't make limits. What else? Let's talk about what's actually important. Individualism is destroying everything. I can barely even survive. I can't really survive. I can't even work on the project I'm trying to work on, working full time for basically minimum wage. And jobs are a lot harder now. There's a lot of procedures, electronic procedures, and if you're not good at that stuff, it's pretty difficult, and nobody understands. Unless you're really bad at that stuff too, people just look at you like you're weird or something. How can you not get that? Also just remembering bureaucratic things. Some people just absorb those things. So there's a lot of people that are struggling because it's already hard, because people are consolidating their wealth and only thinking about themselves. Capitalism, it's not that it's bad, it's just that it's a game. And if you can't treat life as a game, you have to create a buffer for the game, so it doesn't consume itself. Then if everyone's out for themselves, pretty much, then you're going to create a situation like we have right now, and it's not going to get any better. It's only going to get worse, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, to the point where I could afford to live 10 years ago, and 10 years before that, I hear people tell me that it was even easier. 25 years ago, I had a lady tell me that when she was in her 20s that she only spent 25% of her income on rent, whereas now it's 75%. If you're working retail or something, and they expect everything out of you to dedicate your entire life, and they think it's really important. And then the only thing that people are interested in is money or lottery. They don't think about the daily routine of the cell, for example, the fact that every single little cell in your body is more complicated than anything more nuanced, I should say, not complicated, than anything that any human has ever done. It's not even remotely appreciated. What else? So, in order to solve the problem of capitalism without actually interfering with capitalism, you have to create a base subsidized rent, subsidized healthcare. And the way you would do that is you'd make a deal with the Federal Reserve to reground the dollar, possibly. Like I said before, I've been working on this worldview for 14 years. Nobody cares, but that's what they don't tell you when you you take out all these student loans, and they're talking about all these lofty concepts, these philosophers and everything. They don't tell you when you get out in the world, nobody cares. Everyone's just grinding, trying to either make as much money as possible so they can feel superior to others, or because they're competitive. So, if you regrounded the dollar, and then funded also out of that this subsidized rent program, then you wouldn't have to worry about like everyone hoarding money, because even if everyone hoarded money and you weren't very good at life, at least you know that you have your little, you're not going to be homeless. And you can do it by state, because cost of living diverged by state. But you'd have to be universal by state. You couldn't, otherwise, like the poor areas, they would just take their subsidy and try to move to rich areas, and the rich people want to feel better than the poor people, so they're not going to go for that. You have to work within everyone's dispositions, and we all have these different dispositional personalities, and nobody realizes that the reason why everyone's antagonistic is not because we're these little hidden pushes from within, and we have like free will, but that we're dispositions in opposition, and we can't tell that we're all supposed to be expressed. Like, all of dispositional personalities are there. It's non-reductive and it's non-repetitive, so we're almost like in conflict by default until we can realize what's actually happening and adapt to it by, creating a base subsidized rent and health and dental. People don't realize that the fact that they are proficient at life is not because some hidden willpower. It's because their personality is easier. They don't get bored by boring things. They can follow the procedures. They don't think. That's an advantage. But the world has to work for everyone, including the bankers. Like, they have a disposition to symbolic power. And then you get the protesters, and they think that they're evil, but really they're just doing what their personality does, and they're just doing what their personality does. And the solution is not antagonism. Like, Occupy Wall Street didn't do anything because the banks don't care. Protest doesn't do anything. The banks just paid the police department. They made a donation to the police department for $1 million or $2 million or something, while the Occupy thing was going on right out in the open. That's how much they care, or that's how much they're scared. So that's sort of Generation Y. Hopefully Generation Z sees through that illusion. That protest isn't really helping, at least in America, or anywhere. Like, even if you got rid of this disposition to symbolic power, it's just going to come back. If you want like a permanent solution where civilization can progress, where we can have the time to think about what existence is, as opposed to just grinding and being tired all the time, and doing things that are cool, like creating new sports for people to play. Like, I have sports invented in my head that everyone can play that are interesting, like birdie ball, which is like a hybridization of baseball and badminton, with a little heavier bird, and like you can use a different skill where you flick it and you can make it go fast, and you swing like it's more like a bow, and anyone can play. It's not like something that requires like a lot of special size or anything like that, which everything is like these little extremes, like you can swim really fast but you can't do anything else, or you can run really fast but you can't do anything else. So I don't know what else to say today. I could talk about a million things, but I think I'll stop there.